Hey folks, Alan Saunders joining you once again with Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm with Nick Farabaugh, as always, as we're breaking down the 2022 NFL Draft pretty much every day as we lead up to the draft, which starts on April 28th. So we got a whole month of Draft Talk. Nick and I have been traveling the country, getting ready to talk about this draft. We were at the Senior Bowl, we were at the Combine, we've been at Pro Days, and we're hoping to bring some of that knowledge and expertise to you here on this podcast on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And this week, Nick and I were at the Pitt Pro Day on Monday. Thursday, we were at the Penn State Pro Day. And the Steelers brass, the top brass, they weren't there. They were at Cincinnati seeing quarterback Desmond Ridder, which if there was any question whether or not the Steelers are still interested in the quarterback position, particularly in the first round, I think we can eliminate all of that after this week. The Steelers went to see Kenny Pickett. They went to see Malik Willis. We've known they like those players. They went to see Matt Corral and Desmond Ridder too. Let's talk about those two guys and how they might be fits for the Steelers. But Nick, I mean, were you surprised that Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert went to see Corral and Ridder, and they did so by skipping the Ohio State and Penn State Pro Days, two places they've pretty much always gone?
Yeah, that was a little surprising to me because you always thought they would go to their staples, right? Especially it's Kevin Colbert's last run. Usually they're always at Ohio State. They're a mainstay at Penn State. They go there every single year. Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert have deep roots there, plenty of connections. So you would expect them to go there. But, and I said this prior to the week, and it was a quarterback week, right? The 4 straight days with quarterback pro days, essentially. And I said, this is going to tell us a lot about how interested they are in drafting a quarterback. Is this more than just Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis? I think we all expected them to go to Pitt. I think we all expected them to go to Liberty. That was obvious. But I don't think we had been able to gauge their interest in a Corral or a Ridder as well as we had a Willis or a Pickett, right? We knew they were interested in those two. So now I think this is very telling. I think we might be in a situation here where it's best quarterback available. I think we have to start talking about that. I don't think it's necessarily 100% quarterback, but I think we're getting to the point now where they're probably going to be on Monday. They're going to be in UNC at Sam Howell's Pro Day. We're going to probably be talking about they're probably going to take a quarterback. That's the more likely option now. I would bet they would take a quarterback over any other position.
I agree. And, I think when we talked about Willis and we talked about Pickett, I think that the important part of that conversation was, well, okay, they like these guys and they're showing interest in these guys, but those guys probably aren't going to be available when the Steelers pick at number 20. I don't think that's the case for Desmond Ridder and Matt Corral. I saw an insane mock draft yesterday that had them going in the top 15, but I think generally those guys are going to be there at 20. So, I think they're more realistic draft picks for the Steelers than Pickett and Willis are.
Oh, easily. I think both are. I think the Steelers could sit at 20 and take both Corral and Ridder. Maybe I think less so Corral. I think there is a chance that a Washington or New Orleans or a team like that maybe falls in love with Matt Corral and takes him before the Steelers are on the board, or maybe even Seattle. Maybe Seattle has one of their off-brand picks where they kind of shock the world and take someone like a Corral in the top 10. But I think Ridder is pretty comfortably going to be there at 20. I don't really see a reason why he shouldn't be there at 20. So if the Steelers, again, this just goes back to the Malik Willis conversation we had on the last episode. It's how much are you willing to give up if you think Malik Willis is the best quarterback in the draft, or how much are you willing to give up if you want to really get Kenny Pickett? That's kind of all the questions, right? How much are you willing to give up to go up and get Willis or Pickett? And again, I really don't think they're going to move up for Corral or Ridder. I know there was that insane mock where they moved up 8 spots and gave up a 2023 first for Ridder, which is insane to me. That'd be a terrible move. But again, I don't think they're going to move up for those guys. I think that's more of like, okay, we sit at 20. Here are our options. Do we still want to take Corral or Ridder? So let's get a look at them.
Yeah, I don't know. Everybody's kind of been in agreement that it's sort of a down quarterback class. In a normal year, picking the third quarterback off the board at number 20 would not be a head-turning move. But I think it would be this year, right? I don't think a lot of people think that 20 is where either these guys, or you could put Sam Howell in that mix, should go. Is Desmond Ridder or Matt Corral at number 20 overall a good draft pick?
I wouldn't make the pick. I mean, listen, like in a usual class, and I talked about this with you a little bit. Now, 20 is around the range where Malik Willis would probably usually go. Like, a late to mid first type guy that you take a swing on, but he's the only guy to take the upside swing on really this year. And Ritter and Corral are more day two players, the guys that you might want to develop that have upside, but they have so many types of flaws that they don't have quite the upside that Ritter has or Willis has, and they don't have this floor that Pickett has. So what are you really doing by drafting one of those at 20? You're really just taking a swing, and you don't have the floor that Pickett has, and you don't have the upside that Willis has. So it's tough for me to see, in my opinion, a good value pick there outside of Pickett or Willis. And again, I don't think both of those guys are going to even be at 20. So personally, if both those guys are off the board, I'd pass on the quarterback position at 20, or I trade back.
Yeah, I think trade back is, something that the Steelers basically never do. Definitely a realistic option if you're looking at taking Ritter or Corral at 20, because there aren't a ton of quarterback needy teams behind them until they get down to, where's Detroit, 32, right? I mean, most those are the playoff teams, right? Those are the teams that have their guys coming back. So it's a little bit easier to envision moving back and taking one of those guys. The Steelers also obviously have a lot of areas where they can upgrade their team. So adding draft picks makes a lot of sense for them. I think that's something that's a possibility. Let's talk about the individual players, Ritter and Corral. I'll start with Ritter because I like him the better of these two. I think he has a higher floor. I think he's a more accomplished passer. And I think he is in many ways sort of like a Kenny Pickett light, where he played for a very long time. He has some usable athleticism, but he's not really what I would call a running quarterback. And the results got better by the end of his career. But if you look at the total picture, he doesn't have the kind of upside that you're usually looking for when you're talking about a first round quarterback. What do you see in Desmond Ritter that has put him into this conversation to be a first round pick?
He's kind of weirdly pro ready, but not pro ready at the same time. It's very interesting. He's a very fascinating prospect to me. Terrible mechanics, especially the lower body. And he has a really long release, but he throws with anticipation. He's got really good processing. I think he's a really smart quarterback, and I think that's something that will stick out to teams. And in that way, he's very pro ready. But his accuracy is all over the map. I was talking with Derek Bell, who was there at Cincinnati Pro Day, and he said he was all over the map against air. I mean, that's never good. If you're working against air and you're all over the map, what are you going to do against live rush? And it shows up on his tape. So his accuracy is going to be his biggest bane of his existence. He's going to have to fix that lower body. He's going to have to fix the long elongated release. I think he's pro ready from a mental standpoint, which is a great thing. I mean, that's a big hurdle to overcome for most quarterbacks. But again, even though he has that athleticism, what is he really going to end up being if he's not accurate? And more importantly as well, he's not necessarily a guy. He's a decent arm. I don't love the arm. I know he launched one that I think went like 70 yards at Cincinnati Pro Day, but it wasn't an impressive 70 yards. Like, it wasn't like Malik Willis's throw, right? And I hate scouting Pro Day throws because it's really useless. But again, it wasn't the same type of deal. He has a decent arm, but not a great arm, kind of in the Kenny Pickett arm range. So I don't know. He's a really interesting prospect. I think he'll end up probably being a starter in the NFL at some point. I just don't see a scenario where you draft him and you end up actually being happy with him, say 4 or 5 years down the line, enough to say, yeah, we're going to sign this guy to a second contract and not draft another quarterback. He kind of gives me the same vibes as like a Daniel Jones in a lot of ways, where you have that kind of usable athleticism, a decent arm, maybe a little bit more ready from a mental perspective than Jones, but the mechanics are an issue. So I'm not in love with Desmond Ritter.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. And I think he was a reasonable pick. And if the Steelers just want to stay at 20 and take him, but I don't think it's a good pick. I think there will be a more talented player. If you look at it, okay, so if there are 2 quarterbacks off the board already, and you look at the rest of the way the board would have to fall to get there, I just think there's going to be a really good player there that's an impact player at another position, whether that's a Jordan Davis or or one of the wide receivers like an Olave or a Williams, or one of the corners, Stingley, we saw mocked to the Steelers this week, or Terrell Booth. I don't know. To me, those are like Pro Bowl type players, and I just don't see Pro Bowl type upside from Desmond Ridder. I think he can be a starting quarterback in the NFL, but I don't think he's a great one, and in a class where there's not, a depth of talent at the position, his stock has been elevated, where I think in most years he'd be a day 2, maybe even a day 3 pick. I mean, I look at like a guy like Dak Prescott, for example, like he was a 4th round pick coming out now. That worked out really well for the Dallas Cowboys, but like that to me, I think Dak was maybe a more exciting prospect coming out of college, and he went in the 4th round. So that kind of tells you how I think that Ridder in the 1st would be a pretty significant overdraft. But I do think he's better than Corral, who I have serious questions about whether he is even an NFL starting quarterback. We were racking our brains on the way to or from Penn State trying to come up with a comparison for him in the NFL. He is an interesting prospect. I'll give him that. I love his size and his toughness as a runner. He really is the one quarterback in this class that runs like a running back. I said Taysom Hill as a comp. I don't know. Nobody wants Taysom Hill as their starting quarterback, though, right? I mean, that's kind of the catch there.
Yeah, I don't know what you do with Matt Corral, because he's got such a heavy RPO scheme he comes from, and it was essentially just one read and go. So you don't really see a lot on tape where he's moving to other progressions. And obviously in the NFL, you're going to have to do that. You're not going to run an NFL offense that's like 60% RPOs. It's just not realistic. There's a lot of RPOs in the NFL, and Matt Canada is a very RPO heavy scheme, but even he doesn't do as many as Lane Kiffin does. And so it's going to be in question. How is he going to progress from a mental aspect? And then you don't really have great tools either. I don't think the arm's got great. I don't think that, he's good athletically, but he also plays with this kind of reckless style. So is he going to be hurt a lot too? Because he plays with a really tough style where he goes and tries to really play like a running back. As you said, he runs like a running back. So is his durability going to be a question as well? I don't know. It's not an exciting, we don't see an exciting prospect. He's maybe a little bit more accurate than Ridder is, and maybe a little bit more polished from a mechanic standpoint. But the mental processing, I'd rather take the mental processing of Ridder. And honestly, I think Ridder's also a superior athlete in terms of testing. And I think in terms of what Corral would have tested, I think that Ridder would have tested better. On film, I think Ridder's a superior athlete. He just doesn't use it as much as Corral does. But I don't see what you get in Corral in the 1st round. I don't think you have a ton of upside there. I don't think you have a very high floor there either. I think you have a guy that maybe is a low-end starter at best. I don't love what I see from Matt Corral. I'm probably out on Matt Corral in terms of drafting him at 20. I think that would be one of the more significant overdrafts. I think there's a rationale for Ridder at 20 because he has some upside still. He has the athleticism. He has the processing. I'm not sure what I don't know what you say to justify picking Corral in round 1, period.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. And I'm not even really like it. I think there actually may be some value in the 2nd round in this quarterback class, because I don't think teams at the top of the 2nd round are going to, I think most of the quarterback needy teams are either going to go 1st round or they're going to go not at all. So maybe a guy like Howell or Corral ends up available for the Steelers at 52. I think that's plausible. I might be interested there. Certainly not beforehand. I just think there's too many questions about his game. He's not an elite athlete despite being a good runner. And yeah, I don't know. I just can't see. I can't see him being the pick. And obviously Sam Howell's pro day is on Monday, and we'll probably talk more about him after that. But I put him in that same bin, right? I mean, there's maybe some more upside there than Corral, maybe even more upside than Ridder, but serious question marks as well. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like if the Steelers are picking a quarterback in this draft, and it's at number 20, Desmond Ridder is kind of the most likely guy. If they move up, maybe it's Willis or Pickett. If they move down, maybe all bets are off. But if it's a 20, I don't know, Ridder feels like the only Goldilocks guy for where they're drafting.
He feels like the best value there too, in terms of the quarterback position. Because again, I think you have a defined floor with him, and I think you have some considerable upside with him too. So there's at least things to look for. If you can develop Desmond Ritter's mechanics and you can actually fix his mechanics, he could be a legitimately decent quarterback. Like, that's the thing. There's a path here for Desmond Ritter to get better. And there's a very narrow path for someone like, say, a Corral to actually usurp what Ritter could become. And he's going to at least be, if say Mitch Trubisky ends up being the starter and then he gets hurt, there's a good chance there that even if Rudolph's on the roster, that Ritter actually would come in and start because he has a pro-ready type mold to him. So there's that as well. I think Ritter, again, I wouldn't draft him at 20, but there is a rationale to it. There are considerable traits that I could point to say, okay, I see where they were coming from. I cannot make the same argument for Matt Corral personally. I don't see the same upside. I don't see the same floor. I don't see the same pro readiness that I see with a guy like Ritter. And that doesn't mean I'm in on Ritter. I don't love Desmond Ritter's game either, but there's considerably more upside there. There's considerably more assertiveness in how he reads the field. He has better eyes. He has better anticipation. He has a lot of things better, and his NFL readiness is just at a higher level, and that still comes with some upside, even though he's been in college for 5 years.
Yep, I'm totally on board with that, and I think I'm a little bit confused by the Steelers being so quarterback focused here, especially the decision to go see Corral. I understand he wasn't at the Senior Bowl, so they probably feel the least comfortable with him as compared to the other guys. They also scouted the other players more during their season than they did Corral. But like, Ohio State has a bunch of good players that the Steelers didn't go look at, especially players that they could take at number 20. We've had this long streak of Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin being at players' pro days. That they take in the first round. I guess then Chris Olave is off the board.
Guess both him and Wilson are off the board. I mean, that's kind of where you're at, right? Unless this is the year that they finally break that trend, which I guess is always possible, right? The board falls right, I guess. I mean, but they went to Georgia Pro Day, they went to Clemson Pro Day. Colbert was at Notre Dame's Pro Day yesterday, so Kyle Hamilton, I guess, is an option at 20 if he falls. Which is very unlikely, of course, but I guess if he does fall, that's an option. But still, it feels like they've really narrowed their focus here, and they're kind of just tunnel vision towards a quarterback right now, which is never a good thing, by the way. You never want to be tunnel vision and say, we got to take a quarterback here.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess the corners they've seen, right? They saw Booth, they saw Sauce Gardner along with Ritter at Cincinnati. I would assume they will go to LSU to see Stingley. I think they're next week. So I guess corner and they saw Jordan Davis and they
saw Devonta Wyatt.
Yeah. And so I guess D-line, but they haven't gone to see any of the big tackles, right? I mean, I don't think any of them are going to fall, but I don't think Hamilton's going to fall either. I don't really think Sauce Gardner's going to fall either. They're kind of looking at some of those positions, but not others. It really does seem like they've kind of narrowed this down. And the Steelers are obviously not great at hiding their interests. So I think we can take a lot out of that. I don't think it feels wrong to sit here and say the Steelers are really focused on quarterbacks. That's how they do business, how they've done business. And I think it's fair to evaluate them based on that. Sort of on that note, but on a different level, we were at Penn State on Thursday, and the Steelers sent a linebackers coach, Jerry Olszewski, senior defensive assistant, Brian Flores, and cornerbacks coach, Grady Brown. So I think that tells me they're looking at the defensive players for the Nittany Lions. Some good ones there. But to me, Brandon Smith is really the one that Jerry O was doing his individual workout, obviously showing a heightened interest in him. To me, he's the second round pick guy. Is he an option for the Steelers at 52 to you?
I'd say more 84. He might not make it there, but I think 52 is rich for him. You're talking about, there's probably going to be other players on the board there. There's probably going to be one, they went to one of the Georgia linebackers. Tyndall could be on the board there. Quay Walker could be on the board there, and they obviously saw them up in front. I know you're not a Quay Walker fan. We've had many discussions about that going back to Mobile. You were not a Quay Walker fan. Like there are going to be options there. Leo Chenal is going to be on the board, maybe from Wisconsin. So I don't know if Smith at 52 is going to. I don't think he tested fine. I don't think he tested as well as I thought he would though. Didn't have a good broad, and he kind of. And I told you this during the day. He was falling a lot in his workout. It was very weird, just tripping over himself, not having great balance. I don't know if it was just a bad day, being nervous in front of everyone, in front of his big interview. And of course, it's very, very reasonable for that. But he fell down a little bit too much during a pro day for what I would consider usual. I feel like that at 84, I think he's good value though. Upside, he's pretty raw still, but he can cover, and he's got great athleticism.
Yeah.
But it's like a pretty good linebacker class. So when you guys like Chenal and Tyndall that might still be on the board, I think taking those guys works, especially since you already have, unless you're trying to do an athletic buck linebacker that is also, a coverage specialist. I think they might look for more of a downhill thumper like Tyndall or Chenal that can fill the buck role and be a bit more of a blitzer, because now you kind of have the Mac that can cover and do some things with Miles Jack, right? So Miles Jack, if he's 20, he's only 26. So if Miles Jack ends up having a good year, they're just going to extend him and make him the linebacker of the future. So that's something there to watch too. So I don't know if they're going to, I like Brandon Smith, but round 2 seems a little bit early for me. I would say the more likely guy that they take in round 2, if he's there, is Jaquan Brisker. I thought they showed a lot of hands-on activity towards him, especially Grady Brown was very, very much watching Jaquan Brisker the entire day. And that was something that I noticed. You can tell how teams look at guys at pro days. Like, you follow their eyes, tell me who they like. Grady Brown's eyes consistently were following Jaquan Brisker. And obviously, Steelers have a need there at safety. They're probably going to sign one, but even if they sign, say, KZ, or even if they sign Edmonds back, Honey Badger's, if they sign Honey Badger, he's still 29, almost 30. So if you sign Honey Badger to say a 1-year, 2-year deal, Brisker being drafted and potentially working in those sub packages is still not a crazy idea either. So I think Smith and Brisker are the two guys you're going to look at. I think Smith in round 3, Brisker round 2.
Yeah, I agree. And Brisker, obviously a local guy from the east part of the city, Gateway High School. So a player that the Steelers are pretty familiar with before they get here. And obviously, I think would be a very good fit. Brisker's a very, very versatile secondary piece. You can really put him just about anywhere, but with the Steelers playing a lot more too high safety than they have in the past, I think a safety with some more coverage ability to put in that spot compared to, say, a Terrell Edmonds, who's more of like a downhill guy and the box guy, I think might be an interesting direction for them to go. I think both of those players, Smith and Brisker, are elite coverage guys. And, when you're looking at the way to attack defenses in the league or attack offenses in the league right now, you need players that can cover from all shapes and sizes and all positions. And so I think either way, shoring up their pass defense, they already have an elite pass rush, right? And so if you can pair an elite pass rush with a really, really good pass defense, you can be one of the best defenses in the NFL right now, even if you're not that great against the run. Obviously, the Steelers had issues with the run last year. They've taken some steps to try to fix that with Miles Jack, who should be a help. If they get Stephon Tuitt back, that would be an enormous help. We'll see if they can take some more steps. But even if they're not going to be a great team against the run, and playing too high does do that to you, I think they can be a great team against the pass. And to me, that's what I would rather be anyway. So great. So adding one more, pass first defensive piece, whether that's a coverage inside linebacker or a safety, I think makes a lot of sense there on day 2. I think either of those guys would be good picks for the Steelers on day 2. I think Brisker is really underrated and is a super, I don't think he'll be a first round pick, but I think he'll make whoever takes him wherever they take him very, very happy with that decision, because to me, he's just a guy who's going to be an NFL player for a long time and a really, really good one. Anyone else stand out to you at the Penn State Pro Day? We saw they got Jesse Lucchetta, who's maybe like between an outside linebacker and a defensive end, and Arnold Ebiketie, who's just a pure defensive end? What'd you see from those guys or anybody else?
Yeah, well, I was hoping we'd see Frisman Jackson show up. Jahan Dotson.
Let's see Jahan Dotson. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought Jahan Dotson looked really good in those drills, but obviously they didn't send him there. They sent him to SMU, which is very interesting. So Danny Gray, come on down, I guess. Saw Gray at the Senior Bowl. I thought he was pretty solid there. But I'll say this: I think Dotson looked really good. He stood out to me. Hartlob stood out. I did not know who this guy was before Thursday, but he ran a 4.22. So anytime you run a 4.22, you have my attention. So that's impressive. I'll say Lucetta looked good, I thought. Tariq Castro Fields looked really good in his drills, I thought, as well. Pretty high upside corner that you could take on day 3. I think that would be a good pick for the Steelers on day 3 if they're looking for a young, high upside cornerback with some experience. I like that pick. There were a lot of guys that were there at Penn State Pro Day that did some things. Rasheed Walker didn't work out, which was a little bit of a bummer. I was hoping to see him a little bit more live. But I thought most guys here at Penn State Pro Day did pretty well for themselves, and they jumped really well. They were very explosive athletes. Like everyone that at least mattered got over like 36 inches on the vertical. So that was impressive. But again, I think Dotson, if you're talking about guys that stood out, was one. I thought he would be a day 2 option for them at receiver, but it seems like they're kind of zeroing in on a few guys here like Pickens and Ross and Gray that they really like.
And they sent Blaine Stewart up to North Dakota State. So I guess that puts Christian Watson in the mix as well for that spot. Anything else before we wrap up here? It's been a really busy week. We've had huge pro days. We're looking forward to another really big one next week with Sam Howell's pro day. And then maybe we'll get just kind of get into the nitty gritty of the draft position by positions, usually how we do it. But anything else here before we wrap up today?
Not too much, man. I think we covered all of our bases.
Yeah, I think so too. So make sure to hit us up with a comment if there's something, a player you want us to talk about, a position that you think the Steelers should draft, or whatever, really, something off the wall, like where we eat on the road, or anything really. It's all fair game. Leave us a comment, hit us up on Twitter, and we will address it in a future episode. You can find all those episodes at Pittsburgh Sports Live. Make sure you like and subscribe for notifications for the YouTube channel. You'll be the first to know when our show and all the rest of the shows here at Pittsburgh Sports Live come out. And to check out all our coverage, which is all over the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of sites. This week we're Penn State coverage and Steelers coverage and Pitt coverage and all kinds. So make sure you check all that out as well. For Nick Farabaugh, I'm Alan Saunders. Thanks for watching Draft Talk, and we'll see you next time.